Howdy, folks. This is just a reminder that if you like this content, you can help me out by liking, commenting, and especially by subscribing. And be sure to hit the bell notification so you always get notified whenever I have a new video. Hope you enjoy this.
Well, I think my last question was about there's no salvation outside of the church. Could you define what that means traditionally and what it means today? Has it changed? It seems as if you read some statements like extra.
Yeah. Okay. So let me have, because I'm going to need to go in a minute. So let me have a swing at that.
That's the last question.
Yeah. So this is a phrase that comes to us from the church fathers, and it's been understood somewhat differently in different periods of history. The church in question is understood to be the Catholic Church, and the idea that is at the core of this is, well, the Catholic Church is God's church, and so if you separate yourself from the Catholic Church, then you're separating yourself from God, and so you wouldn't be saved. Having said that, even in the earliest ages, it was always understood that it doesn't mean that everybody who is a non-Catholic is going to be lost. There are, for example, various early church fathers talked about how there were righteous Gentiles who did not know God, like some of the Greek philosophers, who nevertheless reasoned their way to the existence of God and tried to live according to reason, or logos in Greek. And they would say, even though these people didn't have an explicit knowledge of Jesus Christ, they were still trying to live according to reason, according to logos. And therefore, they were implicitly trying to live according to the Christian message. And so they could be saved through union with the Logos, with Jesus, even though they didn't know that's how they were being saved. So they weren't putting themselves in deliberate opposition to God. This phrase, no salvation outside the church, arose in a context of people who were like consciously, knowingly separating themselves from the Catholic Church and saying you shouldn't be Catholic, that's not God's church, and so forth. Even then, though, it was recognized that there were catechumens, people who were planning on becoming Christian, who were planning on becoming Catholic, and they were saved. Even though they weren't yet baptized, they weren't yet members of the church. So this saying has to be understood with some exceptions to it. Like for catechumens, you have St. Augustine talking about how, a catechumen who plans to become Christian, he plans to become Catholic, but he dies first, he's going to heaven. So he still has a saving union with the church because he's not knowingly and culpably separating himself from it. Well, by the Middle Ages, the world had been so thoroughly evangelized that they thought everybody knows that the Catholic Church is God's church. And so if you separate yourself from it, let's say you're a Jew or a Muslim or a member of some other Christian sect, you must be at fault. And so it was broadly assumed that if you're not a Catholic, that you're not going to be saved because you must be at fault. Well, that view could persist as long as a couple of things happened. One of them is the different communities didn't talk to each other that much, which made it easy to assume that other people are in bad faith and it must be their fault. And second, as long as the New World hadn't been discovered. Because there was always this question, so what if you need to be Catholic to be saved, what if you grew up on an island, and there was no one to teach you about Jesus and his church? I mean, what would God do in that situation? And there was actually speculation that, well, maybe God would send an angel to tell you the gospel and baptize you, if you grew up on an island. Well, then 1492 happened, and all of a sudden there's this new world with millions and millions of people in it, and they're not having angels show up to preach to them and baptize them. So this prompted a reconsideration on the part of Catholic theologians. It's like, how do we account for these people? How do we relate them to these principles? And at the same time, unfortunately, we had the wars of religion happening between Protestants and Catholics, and that kept passions pretty high. But more recently, the passions have cooled off, and the communities have started talking to each other instead of sticking swords into each other. And as we've talked to each other, we've both realized, hey, Catholics have realized a lot of these Protestants were just raised this way. They're in good faith. And a lot of Protestants have realized, Catholics are raised that way. They're not trying to resist God. They're not deliberately blinding themselves. They're in good faith too. And so what the Church has come to, and this is articulated, for example, in the Vatican II document Dei Verbum, is a recognition that even though there is a principle of if you knowingly and deliberately separate yourself from Christ and his Church, you're separating yourself from Christ and you're not going to be saved. That doesn't mean everybody who's not Catholic has done that. There are lots of people who never heard the gospel, but they otherwise would cooperate with what God wants from them. At least if they knew what God wanted, they'd cooperate. And there are other people who were just raised in some other tradition. They never personally rejected. They may have heard about and said, oh, I don't buy that. But they haven't personally, through their own fault, rejected the Catholic faith. And so these people can, in the words of Vatican II, still be associated with the Church in a way that results in salvation. And so, if you know the truth, that the Catholic Church represents the fullness of God's truth, and he wants you to be Catholic, and it's a serious matter, well, then you need to become a Catholic. And if you don't, through your own fault, then it's like rejecting God on anything else. Like if you know God really wants you not to commit adultery, and you do commit adultery through your own fault, well, then you're rejecting God on a key point. But loads of people are not in that position. They either have not heard the faith, or they have not heard a convincing presentation of the faith, or they otherwise, were just raised a certain way, and it's not their fault that they aren't members of the Catholic Church. And as long as they otherwise, try to live up to the degree of light and grace that they have received, then they can still be saved. And so, they're going to be saved through Jesus and in a relationship with his Church. They just aren't aware of those facts in this life.
All right. Well, I will give the last word to you. That was all my questions. I don't know if you had any other thoughts or...
Nope.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jimmy, for coming on. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll again put a link to his channel in the description below. Highly encourage you guys to go watch him. And thanks again for watching. And if you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon.
And before we go, just one more reminder that if you like what you've watched, you can help me out by liking, commenting, and especially by subscribing. I'm trying to grow my channel, and I'd really appreciate your help. Thank you, and God bless you.